Hey everybody, Jason Burmis here, and look, here's the deal. Jeffrey Epstein is going to have a bail hearing on Thursday, but Jeffrey Berman, the man you saw at the press conference that was giving us all the information regarding this, he really stepped it up and wrote an in-depth letter, I believe, to Henry Pittman, who is the judge, and pulled no punches. There's some real big information, some confirmation in there. They talk about how the eyewitnesses and the victims have provided credible information, but they also talk about, I believe he has no less than 17 different vehicles. Let me repeat that, 17 different registered vehicles, and what a flight risk he is. Now, I wanted to read this entire thing because I think it is actually important, but again, I want to remind people we're going to find out Thursday whether or not the judge takes this seriously, and I really do think he will. At the top of the next hour, 1 hour from now, I'm also going to be interviewing Derek Broze. Derek Broze interview with Bradley Edwards, one of the lawyers that actually defeated Epstein, has gone semi-viral. So we're definitely interested in doing that as well. And I can't wait to get his take. We're going to try to do everything Trump with Derek Broze. So the good, the bad, the ugly of Jeffrey Epstein and Trump coming up in the next hour. But first, I want to read this letter because, again, Jeffrey Berman, good job. This is an amazing letter, and I really do believe that after reading this, it's going to be hard for the judge to justify letting him out on any type of bail. So let's just get right to it. The government respectfully submits this letter in advance of the bail hearing scheduled for July 8th, 2019 in the above captioned case. For the reasons set forth herein, the court should order that the defendant be detained pending trial. Awesome. He cannot meet his burden of overcoming the presumption that there is no combination of conditions that would reasonably assure his continued appearance in this case or protect the safety of the community where to be released. As set forth below, the charges in this case are exceptionally serious. The defendant is alleged to be a serial sexual predator who preyed on dozens of minor girls over a period of years, and he now faces potentially massive prison sentence predicated on substantial and multifaceted evidence of his guilt. And by the way, this came from a sealed indictment on July 2nd. So that's when this was presented to a judge, I believe, and was unsealed when they arrested him. Let's see. In light of the strength of the government's evidence and the substantial incarceratory term the defendant would face upon conviction, there is an extraordinary risk of flight, particularly given the defendant's exorbitant wealth, his ownership of and access to private planes capable of international travel, his significant international ties. Indeed, the arrest of the defendant occurred when he arrived in the United States on his private jet after having returned from a multi-week stay abroad. Finally, and as detailed herein, the government has real concerns, grounded in past experience with this defendant, that if allowed to remain out on bail, the defendant could attempt to pressure and intimidate witnesses and potential witnesses in this case. Remember, he put out a phone number yesterday for other people to come forward if they had credible evidence. I mean, we could just be seeing the beginning. Once again, when they raided his home, by the way, his mansion is in this document. This is where we find out they have it valued at $77 million. See, if one mansion's worth $77 million, I'm sorry, this talk of him not being a billionaire sounds a lot like bullshit. With all of his residences, guys, think about this. This is an international ring. He may have hid those assets, but when you take a look at this, and just the New York residence alone is worth $77 million, and that's just his estates, this man seems to absolutely be a billionaire. I think anything otherwise is just sheer disinformation. Let's see, where are we at? The defendant thus cannot overcome the statutory presumption that detention is appropriate in this case, and the court should order that he be detained pending trial. Damn straight he should be. All right, so that's just in the very beginning. I mean, they give a huge background and overview, by the way. All right, so on July 2nd, 2019, a federal grand jury in the Southern District of New York returned a sealed indictment. So again, they had this in works about a week ago with this sealed indictment. That's when they returned it. So obviously they were working on it before then, but I guess they were just waiting for him to come back into the country, and once he did, that's when they got him. Charging the defendant with 1 count of sex trafficking of minors and 1 count of conspiracy to commit sex trafficking of minors. As charged by the grand jury, the facts underlying the charges in the indictments arise from a years-long scheme to sexually abuse underage girls. In particular, beginning in at least 2002. And remember, this case pens from 2002 to 2005. Only in New York and into Florida, although they talk about the employees making flight arrangements, travel arrangements for a lot of these victims. So we'll see where it goes from there. The defendant enticed and recruited dozens of minor girls to engage in sex acts with him, for which he paid the victims hundreds of dollars in cash. And unlike previous documents, guys, this is not as repetitive. He undertook this activity in at least 2 different locations, including his mansion in Manhattan, New York, the New York residence, and his estate in Palm Beach, Florida, the Palm Beach residence. In both New York and Florida, the defendant perpetuated this abuse in similar ways. Victims were initially recruited to provide massages to the defendant, which would be performed nude or partially nude and would become increasingly sexual in nature, and would typically include 1 or more sex acts, including groping and direct or indirect contact with a victim's genitals. The defendant paid his victims hundreds of dollars in cash for each separate encounter. Moreover, the defendant actively encouraged certain of his victims to recruit additional girls to be similarly sexually abused. He incentivized his victims to become recruiters by paying these victim recruiters hundreds of dollars for each additional girl they brought to him. In this fashion, the defendant created a vast network of underage victims for him to exploit in locations including New York and Palm Beach. And remember, that's just including, but those are where the charges are. The defendant's victims were as young as 14 years old when he abused them. Many of the victims were, for various reasons, often particularly vulnerable to exploitation. The defendant intentionally sought out and knew he was abusing minors. Indeed, in some instances, his victims expressly told him they were underage before or during the period in which he abused them. In creating and maintaining a network of minor victims whom he abused, the defendant worked with others, including employees and associates who facilitated his exploitation of minors by, among other things, contacting victims and scheduling their sexual encounters with the defendant, both in New York and Florida. And by the way, guys, we've shown you that. For instance, other than these people that are named right here that are probably no doubt in these indictments or working with them, because again, they talk about them working. Ghislaine Maxwell, Sarah Kellen, Leslie Groff, and Natalia Malyshev. Those are just some of them. And then if I say, again, type in butlers right here, boom, housekeepers, butlers, employees, pilots, assistants, associates. This is a vast, vast network. A vast, vast network, guys. So let's continue to this document right here. Let's see. The defendant, Jeffrey Epstein, financed and perpetrated this scheme both as its main participant and through his direction of others, including certain of his employees, to further facilitate his rampant abuse of underage girls. As has been widely reported, the defendant is extraordinarily wealthy, and he owns and maintains luxury properties and residences around the world. This talk that he's not a billionaire just does not sit right with me. And guys, by the way, thank you very much for the super chats. Let me see what they are. Jason Schmack, thank you. No GPS data. Look it up. He never paid for the mansion. It was transferred him for a $0 sum. That's very possible, but if it was transferred to him, it's still his property, right? I mean, he's hid. First of all, so I did a video earlier today, and in the first trial, they tried to say that he was worth nothing. That was a tactic his lawyers used, right? And then later on, the tactic itself, that they said that he was worth 9 figures. So that could have been up to like less than $1 billion. And that's where they rolled with billionaire. But it's never been disclosed. He's in the U.S. Virgin Islands. He has Little St. James Island, then Greater St. James all of a sudden. Again, let's take a look at just some of the properties. Some of the properties. And we're going to read through just some of the, not only the properties in a moment, but the vehicles that he had as well. Okay, let's see. Okay, bam. So let's get back to this document here. Let's see. So he owns and maintains luxury properties and residences around the world, including Manhattan, New York, Palm Beach, Florida, Stanley, New Mexico, and Paris, France. Additionally, Epstein owns a private island in the U.S. Virgin Islands, which, as noted above, it is believed to be his primary residence in the United States. His mansion in Manhattan alone, a multi-story townhouse reported to be one of the large single residents in all of Manhattan, which previously housed a school and which he owns through an LLC, has been valued at approximately $77 million. And entities controlled by the defendant also own at least 2 private jets in active service. So there's the confirmation right there. 2 separate private jets confirmed, at least one of which is capable of intercontinental travel. I'm going to go right back to these super chats. Penny and Andrew, can you share the links in the comments? That way we can read your sourced material, copy and paste address. I could try, but honestly, I barely even get to get into the comments these days. Patty Pierce, thank you very much. Appreciate that super chat as well. All right, I'm going to continue through this, guys. As described further below, the defendant possesses 3 active United States passports, and his international connections and travels are extensive. For example, in addition to maintaining a residence in Paris, France, as described above, in the past 18 months alone, the defendant has traveled abroad via private jet, either into or out of the country on approximately more than 20 occasions. The prior Florida investigation is brought up in this. In or about 2005, the defendant was investigated by local police in Palm Beach, Florida, in connection with allegations that he had committed similar sex offenses against minor girls. The investigation ultimately also involved federal authorities, namely the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of Florida and the FBI's Miami office, and included interviews with victims based in Palm Beach area, including some of the alleged victims relevant to count 1 of the instant indictment. So again, they go over the background of this case, and they say, as a result, the defendant was designated as a sex offender with the registration requirements under the National Sex Offender Registration and Notification Act. But we've already discussed that. Instead of a 14-year-old girl, it ended up being a 16-year-old girl. That way, in 30 states, he did not have to register. Let's see. Under the Bail Reform Act, the federal courts are empowered to order a defendant's detention pending trial upon a determination that the defendant is either in a danger to the community or a flight risk, which this guy 100% is. And they cite some court cases. In addition, a court may also have detention if there is a serious risk that the defendant will attempt to obstruct justice or to threaten, injure, or intimidate a prospective witness or juror. So obviously, all of these things are very, very real. The Bail Reform Act lists 4 factors to be considered in the detention analysis: the nature of the circumstances of the crimes charged, the weight of the evidence against the person, the history and characteristics of the defendant, including the person's character, and financial resources. The seriousness of the danger posed by the defendant's release. Evidentiary rules do not apply to the detention hearings, and the government is entitled to present evidence by way of proffer, among other means. So these guys obviously say there's no way they should let him out, okay? Let's see. The defendant should be detained pending trial. For the reasons set forth below, it is difficult to overstate the risk of flight and danger to the community if the defendant is released. And for those reasons, the defendant cannot overcome the statutory presumption in favor of detention in this case. The defendant poses an extreme flight risk. Each of the relevant factors to be considered as a flight risk: the nature and circumstances of the offense, the strength of the evidence, and the history and characteristics of the defendant, counsel strongly in favor of detention. The nature and circumstances of the offense and strength of the evidence. Offense plainly favor detention, specifically enumerating whether the offense involves a minor victim as a factor in bail applications. Indeed, the crime of sex trafficking of a minor is so serious that for a defendant charged with that offense, there is a presumption that no condition or combination of conditions will reasonably assure the appearance of the defendant as required and the safety of the community. Here, as specified in the indictment, The defendant's contest was committed serially over a period of years and affected dozens of victims. I'm telling you guys, we're halfway through this thing. Could it get more hardcore? Could it? Of course not. Let's just skip down to here. Here, the defendant is facing a statutory maximum of decades in prison. Even in the absence of means, which, as discussed in detail below, the defendant has in abundance, the fact alone would provide a compelling incentive for anyone to fail to appear. It is particularly compelling for a defendant who is 66 years old and therefore faces the very real prospect of spending the rest of his life in prison if convicted. The likelihood of a substantial period of incarceration is buttressed by the strength of the evidence as set forth in the indictment. And we've read the indictment. There seems to be plenty of evidence. The evidence in this case is strong. The indictment alleges that the defendant sexually abused dozens of minor victims, and the conspiracy count lists numerous overt acts committed in furtherance of the defendant's crimes. And they mention here the current penalties for violations include a 10-year mandatory minimum sentence. However, the punishment was created through the amendment statute in 2006. So he's looking at up to 40, maximum of 40 years, but I believe it's 45 being reported. So let's continue. Multiple victims, including several specified in the indictment, have provided information against the defendant. Like I told you guys, not only victims but employees are in that indictment. The information is detailed, credible, and corroborated in many instances by other witnesses and contemporaneous documents, records, and other evidence, including, as detailed further below, evidence from a search of the New York residence on the night of the defendant's arrest that reflects an extraordinary volume of photographs of nude and partially nude young girls. You see that, guys? More charges to come. You can bet it. Such corroborating evidence also includes documents and other materials, such as contemporaneous notes, messages recovered from the defendant's residence that include names and contact information for certain victims, and call records that confirm the defendant and his agents were repeatedly in contact with various victims during the charged period. Put simply, all of this evidence, the voluminous and credible testimony of individuals who were sexually abused by the defendant as minors, each of whom are backed up by other evidence, will be devastating evidence of guilt at any trial in this case and weighs heavily in favor of detention. So once again, folks, they're going for it. This is a well-written letter, okay? He's killing it. I thank you so much for this, Mr. Berman. This is exactly what we need. Patty Pierce says, I bet MF Epstein is the fall guy. I think they're taking out more than Epstein. I guess we'll see. I'm not sure. I mean, maybe I'm just getting too hopeful and I'm blinding myself, but this is all really good news. I mean, this is a powerful letter. This is a powerful letter to the judge. I don't know how the judge in this case is going to not be able to detain him. And there's some reports out there, unverified, I believe it was OAN, saying that Epstein wanted to plea down to serving 5 years and give up names. I don't know that I'm down with that. I don't know that he has to give anybody up. They might have enough information after this raid that they can just start knocking these pins down. Finally, it bears noting that neither the age of the conduct nor the defendant's previous non-prosecution agreement with the different federal district pose any impediment to this conviction, to his conviction. As an initial matter, all of the conduct is timely charged, which was amended in 2003 to extend the limitations period for conduct that was timely as of the date of the amendment. So they're saying the NPA is not going to hold up in court with these new charges because they're different and they're of a different time period. Moreover, with respect to the NPA, the agreement to which the Southern District of New York was not a party, which by its express language pertained exclusively to the SDFL investigation and which did not purport to bind any other office or district, does not preclude prosecution in this district for at least 2 reasons. You see that? So again, that's what they're going to try to argue. It's not going to work. Let's see the characteristics of the defendant. The history and characteristics of the defendant also strongly support detention. The defendant is extraordinarily wealthy and has access to vast financial resources to fund any attempt to flee. Indeed, his potential avenues of flight from justice are practically limitless. You see that? We talked about the properties, and now they're going to start, after this second paragraph, all the different cars and motor vehicles. As the defendant acknowledged in his most recent New York State sex offender registration, he has 6 residences, including 2 in the U.S. Virgin Islands, including his own private island, and 1 each in Palm Beach, Florida, Paris, France, New York, and Stanley, New Mexico. The most recent estimated value of the defendant's New York City mansion alone is more than $77 million. The most recent tax-assessed value of the defendant's Palm Beach estate is more than $12 million. The defendant's primary residence is a private island in the U.S. Virgin Islands, a place where any sort of meaningful supervision would be all but impossible. Moreover, the defendant has access to innumerable means to flee. His sex registration documentation of current vehicles lists no fewer than 15 motor vehicles, including 7 Chevy Suburbans, a cargo van, a Range Rover, a Mercedes-Benz sedan, a Cadillac Escalade, and a Hummer II. These cars are registered in various states and territories, including the Virgin Islands, New York, Florida, and New Mexico. The defendant also has access to 2 private jets, giving him the ability to leave the country secretly and on a moment's notice and go virtually anywhere he wants. He is a very frequent international traveler and regularly travels in and from the United States by private plane. So, guys, I think you get the picture here. The conclusion, I'm not going to read the entire document. You can find it. It's pretty easily. The connections, it's amazing. You know, he talks about the harassment of the witnesses during the end, but he says, look, he's looking at the rest of his life in prison. 45s, don't do it. Let's just read the last paragraph. According to the government's respectively submits that the defendant cannot and will not be able to meet his burden of overcoming the strong presumption in favor of detention, that there are no conditions of bail that would assure the defendant's presence in court proceedings in the case or protect the safety of the community, and that any application for bail should be denied. Good job, Mr. Berman. We thank you, and we hope we got more positive news in about a half an hour coming up, guys. I am going to be going live with Derek Brose. And remember, Derek Brose has been a top researcher on this as well. Interviewed Bradley Edwards. He talks about his relationship with Trump here. It's going to be a Trump-heavy broadcast. All the ins and outs, what we do and don't know about that relationship. If you're new to the channel, now's the time to hit that subscribe button, join the Burmist Brigade, like, share, thumbs up, do it all. We're doing 3, 4, 5, 6, sometimes 7 videos a day on many a subject, from the Disney pedophilia rings to NXIVM to Syria, Israel, North Korea, DARPA, Assange, the presidential elections, and so much more. But we're heavy on the Epstein right now. You can bet that. And guys, I'm doing it with your help. That's how we're doing it. The only way we're doing it. We're pumping out videos 7 days a week. I'm not bullshitting you. This is what I can do. I can do 30 to 50 videos a week that matter, that aren't about left and right. They're about right and wrong. So if you want to support me, please go to that GoFundMe. We're going to do it once a month. We're about 2/3 of the way through it, and we're about 2/3 of the way there. So thank you guys all so much, and I'll see you in about a half an hour on the flip side, guys.